So Lanka on the boil. Who or what is accountable? What now lies ahead? Is the economic crisis the sole reason for the meltdown? Are there any lessons that South Asia and indeed even India can learn from what's gone wrong there? I'm joined by a very special guest. Dr. P Saravanamuttu is Director, Center for Policy Alternatives in Sri Lanka. Rajendra Abhyankar was former Deputy High Commissioner of India in Sri Lanka and a senior diplomat. And N. Ram, Director, the Hindu Publishing Group, and someone who's tracked Sri Lanka for years. And let me start with you, Mr. Ram. Are you surprised by what you're seeing in Sri Lanka playing out over the last few weeks? Or do you believe this was something that was coming, given the looming economic crisis that has now exploded?
No, I think it has exceeded all expectations, if you can call them expectations, because it's good to see a democratic popular protest. Not the violence, I think, is a small part of it, but I think the fact that all sections of the people, all classes, all ethnic groups, people belonging to various religions, have come together with one demand: you made a mess, go home. To the entire Rajapaksa family and group, but the president is hanging on, and I think unless he goes, I don't think it's going to be resolved. However, he addressed the nation, and I just learned that he said that within a week he'll appoint a new prime minister and cabinet, restore a version of the 19th Amendment, which clips executive powers and empowers Parliament, at least to an extent, and then he will begin discussion on abolition of the executive presidency when things settle a bit. So he's been having consultations. I think it's too late to attempt to do this. This is a concession, at least in words, but I think it's far too late to do it. Am I surprised? Yes, I think the scale and intensity of the protests, although in the north and east it's less intense, I think it is surprising. And,
let me take that
say
to Dr.
inspiring. I would also say inspiring. Yeah.
Interesting. I'll come to that word inspiring later to ask you what you mean by that. But Dr. Saravanamuttu, are you surprised also? Because, till a few months ago, it appeared that the Rajapakshas were as powerful as any leadership that Sri Lanka had ever had. Suddenly, the economic crisis blows up in their face. What next? Street protests to the point where the Prime Minister has to resign and virtually flee from his residence. Has the scale and intensity of the protests surprised you?
Yes, it has. I think it has surprised everyone that you have such a huge outpouring of popular protest against the Rajapaksas, and that it has been peaceful and it has involved all ethnicities, all religions, all class and caste groups, and all of that kind of thing. It's unified the country together, because the country, everyone has been hit in their bellies. The economic shortages and the sheer corruption, the scale of the corruption of the Rajapaksas has got everyone joined together in coming out in protest. So yes, I mean, it has certainly surprised me, and I think surprised most people. And also, we must not forget one other thing, that is the importance of social media being used to galvanize people to such a great extent.
So, but are you saying that these are leaderless protests? Because there's one view that this is now very politically organized to get the Rajapakshas out at all costs. The other view is this was just anger of the public that just boiled over because they said enough is enough, we don't have food at our homes, and the government must go. Is this leaderless or driven by politics?
Well, it was leaderless, but we have seen that in the last couple of days that certain groups have come to the forefront, like the Inter-University Student Federation, and they are supposed to have political affiliations with the Frontline Socialist Party and even the JVP, so the Janata Vimukti Peramuna. So yes, there are people who have political agendas who are part of Galface, but the beauty of the Galface protests and the protests around the country was that it incorporated a whole variety of political opinions, religions, ethnicities. It was a broad church.
So is it, could I liken it to a Tahrir Square moment for Sri Lanka? Where suddenly yes, the elites are being told enough is enough. The Rajapakshas are being told you've looted the country. The people are saying we want to recapture, reclaim our space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The demand of the protesters is being that Gotabaya Rajapaksa go, that the rest of his family go, and that the money that they allege they have stolen and looted be brought back.
Can I just take that for a moment to Rajendra Abhyankar? Because, Mr. Abhyankar, India's stand is that we stand with the people of Sri Lanka. But this is a government, and not just Mr. Modi's government, but previous governments also have been seen to be generally reaching out to the Rajapaksas. Do you believe that this stand can work, that we are with the people, not with the politicians? How worrying is the situation in Sri Lanka for those in New Delhi who are looking closely at a neighbor in turmoil?
Well, I'll make a few points. First is that the situation, of course, is worrying in Delhi because we had not thought that it would go so much out of hand. And we have done what we could in terms of providing $1 billion but that's not going to be enough. In fact, to set the country right, you're going to need more than $6-7 billion to be given there. But that's besides the point. The thing is, first is that when I was Deputy High Commissioner, I found I was there when the crisis took place, the ethnic crisis, where for the first time, what was a Tamil issue, what was a Sri Lankan issue, became an Indian issue. And I found that the Sri Lankans are very quick to actually take to violence of the kind we are seeing now. We have seen it earlier. That's not new. For a Buddhist country, I'm really surprised that so much violence exists in that country. But that's just a general comment. The basic thing is that the country has been run into the ground by the Rajapaksa family. They have mulcted the country, its treasury, and everything that they could. And they've done it for years. And believe it or not, believe it, that they were democratically elected. And these problems have been taking place in other countries also. Because what is happening, it's a general trend that the democratic governments in most countries are becoming dictatorial, one way or the other.
Let me stop you, because you're saying something very interesting that links to what Mr. Ram said a short while ago, that what you're seeing is inspiring. From Mr. Abhyankar's point, it would be a suggestion that this was an elected autocracy, that the Rajapaksas got elected through the democratic process and then took over the country. When the economic crisis took place, and there are various reasons, from the church attacks to COVID, which were responsible for a tourism-based economy to collapse, Mr. Ram, the people have taken what you're saying is inspiring. What do you mean by that? Are you saying virtually that there is a message in what is happening in Sri Lanka for all elected autocracies, for all those who believe that they rule forever?
Yes, exactly. Because it was spontaneous. Of course, we know that spontaneous movements cannot go on indefinitely. At some point, they'll start declining and so on. But it has to be more organized. And nothing wrong with that, if the demands are democratic. But the lesson is that if your governance is lousy, if you do the opposite of what sound economics dictates, if you do not attend to the less privileged in the country. Sri Lanka used to have very good social indicators, better than India, better than other countries in South Asia. But today, surely misgovernance is at the heart of this. But along with it, if you are autocratic, if you think you can suppress this, and you practice majoritarianism of a most toxic kind, and that is what the Tamils faced for a long time, then I think there's a lesson here that this cannot go on.
You're linking the economic, because I know there are those who are saying that there are those who are critical of the Modi government in India who are saying, look, if you take the people for granted, or any state government run by the so-called, some of our own state government autocratic leaders, that if you take people for granted, they will strike back. Is that fair? Sri Lanka is a small country in a major economic crisis. It's the economic discontent that has led to what has happened. It's not political discontent, Mr. Ram, isn't it?
I think it's both, Rajdeep, because governance is at the heart of the issue. The economy, there are some factors perhaps beyond this government's control, but for foreign exchange reserves, but they did a number of things that were contrary to what good economics would dictate. particularly, and combined with authoritarianism, a kind of decision making where you don't listen to those you should listen to, then I think, and if you're arrogant, if you're autocratic, and and that kind of majoritarianism, thinking I can get through all this, I can steamroller the opposition, then I think this is what you what you will get. But
let me take for a moment, press the pause button.
Just add one thing.
Yes.
I think the crisis is the rulers are not able to rule as before, and the people are not willing to be ruled as before. So that's the deadlock, and surely the solution will be for the rulers to go.
Very interesting the way you're putting it. Dr. Saravanamuttu, you want to take that forward. Is this a combination of Sinhala majoritarianism, as is being suggested, working along with economic discontent, or is it purely actually the economic crisis which has spurred these protests, this scale of protests, which, as you said, cuts across all class, caste barriers at the moment?
Well, the economic crisis has served as a catalyst for an outpouring of despondency, frustration, anger at the government, at the Rajapaksa governments, because Mahinda Rajapaksa was president from 2005 until 2015, at how they have governed. It's a crisis of governance. And it is a crisis of governance in which it is distinguished, or it is not distinguished, but it is sort of known by the kleptocracy, the nepotism, the impunity, the majoritarianism, the authoritarianism, the lack of concern for the people, all of that. I mean, it was marshalling the politics of hate and hurt and harm that got Mahinda Rajapaksa into power and kept him in power by putting forward a very singular nationalist line of government. Then his brother comes in an election where he won by creating a network of Buddhist temples to put forward his candidacy. And he comes forward as a consequence of the Easter Sunday bombings. He says he's going to present himself as a strong, decisive leader. Well, today is the first day that he's spoken to the country since these protests began over a month ago. In addition to that, he is not a politician. Gotabaya Rajapaksa is a military man. His experience in governance is probably commanding a platoon in the army. So he is unable to grasp the basic essentials of economics. He's unable to grasp the basic essentials of politics. And so we have no capacity for proper governance.
So it is essentially a crisis. It is essentially a crisis, you're saying, of complete misgovernance. I'll give a final word to you, Mr. Abhyankar. What should India now do? Very quickly.
I think the first thing is that, as Ranil Wickremesinghe has said, that the Rajapaksa have all of them got to go. Because unless that happens, now I do not recommend, as Narasimha Rao did in 1972, 75, when all this happened, when he came on a mission to find peace in Sri Lanka. But what I would say is that if we have the entree, we should try to see how we can calm tensions. But this is going to ipso facto mean a massive aid and assistance to Sri Lanka. There has always, on the other hand, there has always been a Sri Lankan sort of reluctance or negativity, if I may say, to take stuff from us, to take loans and all that.
No, but should we go ahead? Should we be out there helping the people of Sri Lanka with? We've already committed 1.3 billion. Should we be committing more?
Yes, I think we should be committing more, but we have to find the people like Ranil Wickremesinghe and others, not because they are basically because they all are thinking exactly what all of us here on the panel are thinking, that the Rajapaksas have one way or the other to leave. Because if they don't leave, this situation is not going to change. And possibly we have an entree because we are closest. We have already proven our interest by giving that $1 billion, that we have some kind of an interest, at least a look in, so that we can send an emissary to see whether we can work this something out. But we have to try this. I mean, our foreign minister is extremely well placed to do something like this.
Okay, so essentially, the Rajapakshas have to go lock, stock and barrel, it appears at the moment. Look at what we are saying in the month of May. Could anyone have imagined at the start of the year that the Rajapakshas, the all-powerful family, first family of Sri Lanka, the people are saying, go, for God's sake, go. And in a sense, there's a message for all elected autocracies, don't take the people of any country for granted. To all my guests, as always, thank you very much for joining me. It's a subject that we will keep returning to and track the situation on the ground in Sri Lanka.